In the vast and desolate lands of Mongolia, where the wind and cold chill the bones, a child was born destined to change the course of history. His name was Temujin, and the elders said that at birth he had a blood clot in his hand. In those lands, this sign was no coincidence. It was an omen, a symbol that this child would bring with him a destiny of war, power, and conquest. It was the year 1162, and the Mongol tribes were divided, each fighting for its own survival. Life on the steppe was harsh, almost impossible. Clans betrayed each other for horses, for food, for honor. Mercy did not exist, only strength and cunning. Temujin's father, Yesuge, was a respected chieftain of the Borjigan clan, and his mother, Hoelun, a woman snatched from another clan, a symbol of the forced unions that marked those savage times. Temujin's childhood knew neither comfort nor tenderness. His destiny turned sour early. When he was still a child, his father was poisoned by Tartar rivals during a banquet, and his death sealed the fate of the entire family. Without their leader, the clan was abandoned to their fate. The mother, with her young children, was left alone in the middle of the frozen immensity. They survived by eating roots, small rodents, and whatever little they could hunt. It was then that the boy understood that, in that world, only the strongest made the rules. One day, while the family was fighting over the little food they had, his half-brother Bektor tried to impose himself as leader and refused to share his portion, or so the story goes. Temujin, young but already hardened by hunger, sensed a threat in him. And so, with barely a knowing glance from his younger brother Kasar, he made a decision that would seal his fate. They followed him up the hill. Bektor didn't have time to defend himself. Temujin raised his bow, aimed with trembling hands, and shot. The arrow pierced him. Silently, he fell. Temujin had killed his own brother, not for revenge, but for power. He understood that authority is not asked for, it is taken. At 10 years old, Temujin already knew betrayal, hunger, and pain. He had lost his childhood, but he had gained something more valuable: the inner fire of someone who refuses to surrender. However, the suffering was not yet over. He was captured by a rival tribe, the Taichiud, who enslaved him, humiliated him, and chained him with a wooden ring around his neck. Those days marked his spirit forever. The humiliation turned him to steel. His escape was almost a miracle. A young guard, moved by his determination, decided to help him escape. That man would be remembered later, when Temujin, now lord of all the tribes, would reward him with lands and power. From that experience emerged an idea that would guide his entire life. Loyalty must be earned, not inherited. Temujin understood that ties of blood were fragile, but bonds of trust could build empires. As he grew older, he began to gather followers. He had nothing but his courage, his intelligence, and the power of his gaze. His army didn't begin with thousands, but with just a few men who believed in him. In a world where leaders were born by bloodline, Temujin built power through merit. It was a silent revolution. In the early battles, he faced tribes that had betrayed him and others that had enslaved him. One by one, his enemies fell like dominoes, not only because of his sword, but because of his strategy. Temujin was more than a warrior. He was a visionary. He understood that fear could unite or destroy, and that a word spoken should be worth more than blood shed. In his youth, he forged crucial alliances, such as with Togrul Khan, his godfather and leader of the powerful Karat clan. He also allied himself with Jamuka, his blood brother. though that friendship would later turn into one of the bitterest betrayals of his life. His destiny was intertwined with love and war. His wife Borti was kidnapped by a rival clan. Temujin, with a small group of men, rescued her during one of his first victorious campaigns. From that rescue, Jochi, his firstborn, was born, although his paternity was always surrounded by rumors. For Temujin, however, that never mattered. He acknowledged him as his son, because his code of honor was stronger than the opinions of others. As the years passed, his reputation grew. Stories began to spread across the steppes about the warrior who never forgave betrayal, but rewarded loyalty with generosity. His followers loved him, his enemies feared him, and little by little, the tribes began to bow to his authority. The civil war between the Mongol clans was merciless. Temujin fought not only with the sword, but with his mind. He reorganized the entire tribal system. He divided his army into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 men, regardless of their tribe. For the first time, the Mongols stopped fighting among themselves and began marching under a single banner. He created a code of laws, the Yasa, where treason was punishable by death, but honesty was rewarded with promotion and respect. It was an unprecedented transformation. The young slave had become the architect of a new nation. His vision was not that of a mere plunderer, it was that of a man who dreamed of total unity. Through fire and discipline, he had achieved what no one before him had done, turning the most savage and scattered clans into a single people. In 1206, the leaders of all the Mongolian tribes gathered at the great Kurultai, an assembly that would seal history. Facing the winds of the steppe, Temujin was proclaimed with a new name, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The men drank fermented mare's milk as they swore eternal loyalty. Some say that on that day, the sky above Mongolia rumbled with thunder as if the gods themselves recognized him. The child abandoned in the cold had become the master of all the free men of the steppes. He was no longer Temujin. He was Genghis Khan, and his gaze no longer rested on the Mongolian horizon. He looked beyond, toward the world. What would come next would not be just a series of wars, but the birth of an empire that would change the history of humanity forever. The wind that once saw him flee as a slave now blew to announce the arrival of the conqueror. When Genghis Khan was proclaimed universal ruler, the Mongolian steppes ceased to be a handful of savage clans and became the cradle of an empire destined to devour continents. But for him, unification wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. His gaze lifted beyond the horizon, toward lands that had never heard his name, and a simple and terrifying thought formed in his mind. If the world didn't know him, the world must fear him. His first major campaign was against the Western Xia, a powerful kingdom in northern China. Until then, the Mongols had been known for their ferocity in the open field. But Genghis transformed that brutality into strategy. He captured Chinese engineers, learned about their siege engines, and forced them to build catapults, towers, and battering rams for his armies. What began as a nomadic horde began to evolve into an organized, precise, and nearly impossible-to-stop military machine. He then marched against the even more powerful Jin dynasty, rulers of northern China. It was a long, ruthless, and calculated war. Genghis understood that fear was a more lethal weapon than the sword. Every city that surrendered was spared. Every city that resisted was wiped off the map. His tactics were psychological. Before arriving, he sent messengers offering surrender. If they refused, the punishment was exemplary. Cities burned for days, and stories of his cruelty traveled faster than his armies. But Genghis wasn't just a destroyer. Behind the terror lay order. He promoted religious freedom, something unthinkable in his time. He protected merchants, scholars, artisans, and messengers. He created a postal system called Yam, with stations every 30 kilometers, where riders changed horses to transmit news at astonishing speed. The entire world was beginning to connect under his rule, without even knowing it. By the early 13th century, his empire already encompassed all of Mongolia and much of northern China. But a provocation would change the course of history. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a diplomatic caravan to the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia, seeking to open trade routes. The Khwarezmian ruler, fearful of the Mongols, had the ambassadors executed and the caravan looted. For Genghis Khan, this was an unforgivable act. What followed was a campaign of utter destruction. In less than 2 years, legendary cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Nishapur were razed to the ground. His armies, led by generals like Subotai and Jebe, crossed deserts and mountains with inhuman discipline. According to chronicles, upon entering Bukhara, Genghis climbed onto the pulpit of a mosque and uttered a phrase that still resonates in history. "I am God's punishment. If you hadn't committed great sins, God wouldn't have brought a punishment like me upon you." He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a symbol. His name became synonymous with power and destiny. His army, a swarm of relentless horsemen, crossed Asia as if time stood still. They knew no rest, no fear, no compassion. But behind the devastation lay a rationale: to open trade routes, establish single laws, eliminate the corrupt kingdoms that impeded exchange between East and West. The Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, an expanse never before seen by humanity. In those lands, under his rule, the Silk Road was transformed into a safe highway. Merchants traveled with less fear, scholars exchanged knowledge, and gold flowed between previously unknown worlds. Genghis Khan had created chaos, but also a new global order. And yet, the man behind the myth remained human. He slept little, trusted almost no one, and carried on his shoulders the weight of an empire that could crumble with a single rebellion. Despite his reputation for brutality, he privately sought the advice of shamans and astrologers. He didn't fear men, but he did fear oblivion. He wanted to leave a mark that would survive the centuries. In 1226, already almost 65 years old, he undertook a final campaign against the Tanguts of the Western Xia kingdom, who had rebelled. It was his final war. Accounts vary. Some say he fell ill, others that he was mortally wounded in combat, and still others that he died after falling from his horse. The truth is that his death was completely concealed. It was not to be known until his enemies were annihilated. Before dying, he gave one final order: to completely destroy the Tanguts. And so it was. The kingdom was wiped off the face of the earth. The Khan's body was then taken back to Mongolia. No one knows where he was buried. According to legend, the funeral procession killed everyone who crossed its path to maintain the secret. The location of his grave remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Upon his death, the empire was divided among his sons, but his legacy continued to grow. Under the command of his descendants, such as his son Ogedei and his grandson Kublai Khan, the Mongols would conquer Russia, Persia, and eventually all of China. In less than a century, the Mongol Empire grew to become the largest and continuous area in human history. The Mongol Empire didn't fall because of a single battle, but because of something much more human: internal division. After Genghis Khan's death, his descendants fought for power. The unity he had forged in blood crumbled amid family intrigues, betrayals, and personal ambitions. Over time, the vast empire fragmented into rival khanates, and the force that once swept across Eurasia turned against itself. Without a leader to command respect and order, the Mongols lost what had made them most invincible: discipline. 1 in every 200 people alive on the planet could be descended from him. A 2003 genetic study found that nearly 16 million men in Central Asia share a single Y chromosome, a nearly identical genetic fingerprint that points to a single male ancestor who lived in Mongolia some 800 years ago. Who do you think that is? But beyond his territories, Genghis Khan changed civilization. He unified cultures, fostered communication between East and West, and laid the foundations for a more interconnected world. Paradoxically, the man who rose from the ruins of entire cities was also the architect of a new era of global exchange. For the Mongols, she was a unifying, almost divine being. For the Persians and Russians, she was a demon incarnate. In Europe, she was imagined as a wild beast from the end of the world. They created the largest knowledge exchange system of the Middle Ages, allowing inventions such as gunpowder, paper, and the compass to reach the West. Genghis Khan died as he lived, without asking the gods' permission, leaving behind a story that still resonates 8 centuries later. His empire disappeared by natural law. Nothing lasts forever. But its shadow continues to cast a shadow over world history. Today, almost 8 centuries later, his face is on Mongolian banknotes, his name on airports, and his story in genetic laboratories. Every year, thousands of people make pilgrimages to the steppes where he was born, searching in the wind for the essence of the man who dominated half the world without writing a single word. And although dust has covered his footprints and centuries have erased his borders, one truth remains unchanged. There was a time when a single man, born amidst hunger and snow, made all of humanity tremble. That man was Genghis Khan.